Aloha, welcome to the Mr.G podcast. This is episode 16. Today, we're going to be talking about celebrities that used to be homeless in honor of Jimmy Butler, who used to sleep in a laundromat and is now the biggest star and the biggest stage for the NBA Finals basketball games coming up on Thursday, 7-game series. So, um, congratulations to the Miami Heat and congratulations to the Denver Nuggets. They're going to be playing each other. Those of you listening today, you can listen to the Mr.G podcast on Amazon Podcasts. Apple Podcasts is the best place. Just type Mr.G podcast. Also Spotify, of course, and iHeartRadio podcast, as well as a few other places. The full episodes of the Mr.G podcast are uploaded right away onto Twitter and YouTube. So if you want to catch up as well, you can catch up there. Like I said, today's episode is episode 16. And let's get right into it. Celebrities that used to be homeless. Number one, we have Halle Berry. Now, Halle Berry, I already know this because I had previously made a movie. I made a movie. I made a few videos about celebrities that used to be homeless. Back then, I was actually homeless in the Portland, Oregon library, in the Multnomah County Library in Portland, Oregon. And I was looking online because I kept on saving stories in the back of my head about celebrities that used to be homeless because they would inspire me and keep help me to keep going. But I looked and I was like, nobody. I figured somebody would have made a montage video of all the celebrities that used to be homeless, and nobody. I couldn't find a single video on YouTube or on the internet of that. So I spent that day in the Portland, Oregon library while I was homeless, making a video about celebrities that used to be homeless. So I got to learn all about all the celebrities that used to be homeless while making this video. And there were so many of them, I had to make a part two and use a whole new song for a whole new montage. But about a week after I put up this video, it got a decent amount of views on my first YouTube channel. And then right after that, like 3 major media corporations made like almost exactly the same videos, celebrities that used to be homeless. And then their videos got millions of views. And now you can see that story everywhere. So I just Googled famous people, former homeless. And here we have Halle Berry. Like I said, Halle Berry was kicked out by her mother when she was 21 in New York City, and she ended up living in a homeless shelter in New York City. The New York City homeless shelter is notorious for crimes, and it's probably the largest, uh, you know, city homeless group in the United States. But you don't want to judge a book by its cover, and there's diamonds in the rough wherever you look. So imagine Halle Berry, one of the most gorgeous actresses, James Bond's girl, and she's 21 years old in a homeless shelter. So you don't ever know somebody's story and what they had to go through or what they're capable of. So never judge a book by its cover. All right, up next we have Hilary Swank. Also, I'm familiar with this story. Hilary Swank, the $1 Million Baby star, used to be homeless when her and her mom first moved to Los Angeles. They lived in her mother's car and booked auditions at the 7-Eleven payphone. So that's really a testament to having supportive parents who believe in you and believe in what you're doing. Hilary Swank, she had a mother who believed in her, and she ended up winning 2 Academy Awards as well for Best Actress. Next up, we have Jewel. Whenever you talk about celebrities that used to be homeless, everybody mentions Jewel. She was born Jewel Kilcher, but today everybody known her as her first name. Before that, in the early 90s, she lived out of a van, as it doesn't say it here, but I believe the story is she refused to sleep with her boss, and he refused to give her her last paycheck, and she found herself living in a van. Next up, Dr. Phil. Philip Calvin McGraw, known to viewers as Dr. Phil, was once homeless as a child. Who would have thought that he was ever homeless? All right. Next up, Daniel Craig, James Bond. So a James Bond girl and a James Bond actor were both homeless. Can you believe that? Halle Berry, former James Bond girl, and Daniel Craig, the James Bond when I think of James Bond. And he actually, when he was struggling as an actor, he slept on a park bench in London. So, I mean, it's hard not to. Everybody judges everybody walking around. But if you're walking down a street at night and you see a guy, James Craig, sleeping on a bench, with I picture like newspapers as blankets, which worked half-assed. I always saw it on TV growing up, and I once or twice or a dozen times I found myself in that position. I was like, oh, I get to try out the newspaper blankets. So then it's just like, but then they're just like all crumply, and by the time you wake up, you're just like, if it's that cold, you're just like in a ball. And maybe I've wrapped myself in a ball of newspaper before, but it doesn't work as well as they act like in the movies. So Daniel Craig, yeah, once the James Bond, once he wasn't in a tuxedo, and he wasn't on a beautiful yacht. He was sleeping on a fucking park bench. All right. So, but look at him now. Things change. Next up, Tyler Perry. Tyler Perry might be close to a billionaire, right? He's a mega mogul movie maker. And years before he gained fame in the Mattia blockbuster films, and before he established his own production company, Tyler spent time homeless, living in a Geo Metro, if I'm not remember. People that are old enough, there was a time, I guess maybe on the mainland, they're still around. I've never seen a Geo Metro in Hawaii, but Geo Metros were everywhere. They were like the most common car during the late 90s and early 2000s. All right, next up, Susie Orman. It's funny, there's so many really rich people that used to be homeless. They say millionaires are generally always through inheritance, but billionaires are generally always self-made. So Susie Orman, she lived out of her van for 4 months in Berkeley, I believe, back in 1973. But now she advises others on their finances. Susie is worth 25 million, by the way. I remember learning that story while I was in a library in Berkeley, that Susie Orman lived in a car, and she would go to the public library, the Berkeley Public Library, just like I did when I was homeless. All right, next up, Charlie Chaplin. If you read my book, Gonzo Education, I think it's called the Epitaph, where you have a quote at the beginning. I have a quote from Charlie Chaplin that says, "The whole point of the little fella is that no matter how down on his ass he is, no matter how well the jackals succeed in tearing him apart, he's still a man of dignity. He can still look down on you and you're a whole bloody bunch of money-hungry scum." And I love Charlie Chaplin, and I love the character the Tramp, because that quote says it all. His character the Tramp, the whole point of the little fella is he had dignity. He held his head high. If he was struggling to just get a bite to eat, he was still a man of dignity. And I've had a very hard life. I've worked very hard jobs. I've been in very tough positions, but I've still always kept my dignity. I've never begged for money. I've never, been addicted to hard drugs or even barely used them. I've never, lived in a homeless camp. I've barely ever been to a shelter, despite being homeless for years. And I've always kept myself up, well dressed. And the most important thing about being homeless is not letting other non-homeless people know that you're homeless. So that's what I see with the little tramp. Like, he's just like a traveler, and a tramp is what they used to call, hobos that, would catch the trains and go from place to place during the 1920s and the Great Depression, and even into the 40s and World War II time. And tramps would go and find a meal here and there and have at a soup kitchen. And there are modern day tramps that have done more traveling than the vast majority of people. More than like 70% of people don't go within a 50-mile radius of their hometown, of where they were born, actually. And I've met homeless people across the United States that they get around. They've been to the East Coast, West Coast, Deep South, and they know the United States better than just about anybody. So credits to him. Charlie Chaplin, he's a great silent filmmaker. And I'm going to put a quote of his in my next book that's coming out as well, which is the sequel to Gonzo Education. All right, next up on the list, we have Sam Worthington. Sam Worthington, after establishing himself as a respected actor in Australia, decided to move to the United States in the late 2000s. He fell on his luck, and when he received the news that he got the part for Avatar, he was living in his car. All right, next up, Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison was a struggling poet musician. He slept everywhere from rooftops to cars and even under the pier at Venice Beach. Hey, that's where I got my tattoo, in Venice Beach. Jim Morrison, he lived a very short, fast life. He died at 27, and the Doors had some success for about 5 years. He was raised in an upper middle class household, but he was homeless when he dropped out of UCLA Film School, or it was either USC or UCLA Film School. And I remember from the movie, the famous movie, The Doors, his film project was very abstract, and the other students laughed. He ended up dropping out of college, and that was worked out for him. Next up, I was surprised to see James Cameron. Director James Cameron lived out of his car, but forced selling the rights to the Terminator for $1. I don't know how that $1 made got him out of off the streets, but yeah, he was living in his car. A lot of these celebrities, they're living in their car, but that does count as being homeless. Maybe not in Hawaii, because there's, it's just so expensive here. Next up, William Shatner. Uh, Hooray for William Shatner, a great American, even though he's from Canada. William referenced his experience of being houseless on Twitter. After he was cast as Star Trek and played Captain Kirk, he actually lived behind a movie theater with a dog in his truck. And I don't need to click on that. I already know about it. Let's see, who else? Jim Cramer, a familiar face on CNBC. When he was younger, someone broke into his apartment right after he graduated from Harvard Law School and stole everything he had. He was forced to live in his car, and occasionally, friends would let him stay the night and take a shower. But the majority of the time, he was living in his car before he became a multi-million hedge fund manager. Kelsey Grammer used to be homeless. Kelsey Grammer has had more than his fair share of tragedies in his life. Including being homeless. Randy Quaid, the star of numerous films, yet for some reason he has been troubled with the law in recent years. Randy Quaid is an interesting case. He's just somebody that's maybe just too crazy. They say like 60% of NBA basketball players go broke within like 5-10 years after they retire, and they're being paid millions and millions. So a lot of it is missed money management. You really got to know how to make your money last in this world. Like me, for instance. I could go to the store and get the expensive cheddar cheese, but instead I just choose to make my cheese sandwiches like this with the easy cheese. Today's broadcast is brought to you by nobody, because nobody fucking watches, nobody listens. It's damn good though. Not the cheese kind of sucks, but my podcast is damn good, right? This podcast is the reason for it. The reason we're talking about this is because Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat made it to the NBA Finals. Jimmy Butler is a former homeless person. When he was in a youth, when he was a teenager, he had to sleep wherever he could. And one places that he slept was in a laundromat. I myself know how that is, and it's something I'm familiar with. So I'm really pulling for the Miami Heat in the NBA Finals. I mentioned on yesterday's podcast that I think the Denver Nuggets are going to win pretty easily in 5 games, but that was before I saw an interview with Jimmy Butler, Jimmy Heat, Jimmy Buckets, Jimmy Butler, and they asked him what he thought about the series, and he said, "Oh, I'm looking forward to it, and I like our chances." And he just had a sly smile on his face, and 90% of all communication is nonverbal communication. But after I saw that interview with him where he's like, "I like our chances," and he wasn't cocky about it, he didn't say it like I did just there. He's like, "I like our chances." But he had a sly smile, and I saw something in there, and it like he knew something Like, sometimes you see somebody and you're like, they have a secret. They know something that you don't know. But hey, that's how I see, and I see the world much differently than everybody else. My brain moves in much faster than others, and you can never see yourself through other people's eyes. So this is some good cheese, but I'm going to order some Chick-fil-A today, or a friend of mine is actually going to take me out to Chick-fil-A. And I had it once before and I didn't really like it. I think that has to do with acceptancy variation theory. Now, acceptancy variation theory is if you're going into an event or a certain situation and beforehand you've build it up in your head, like you're buying a used car, for instance, and you've heard so many things about used car salesmen, and you're dreading going to the used car lot, and you don't want to go there, and the guy's going to try to rip you off or overcharge you or have all these add-ons and stuff. But then when you actually go to the used car lot, it's not as bad as you had thought it was going to be. So you overly compensate your experience and you think of it as more highly positive and a better experience than it actually was. And the same thing can happen with a movie. If somebody's like, "Oh, this is the greatest movie ever. The Avengers Endgame is going to make you cry at the end. The 20 minutes Hawaii movie is just so awesome. It's the best thing you've ever seen." And then when you actually see the movie, you're like, "Oh," and that's because you built it up in your head so much. And I think that's the same when I tried Chick-fil-A. Is for years I've always heard about Chick-fil-A. It's so good. Chick-fil-A, it's the best chicken. I love Chick-fil-A. I live off of Chick-fil-A. And here in Hawaii, there is no Chick-fil-A. So I never actually got to try it. Recently, within the last year or two, they opened the first Chick-fil-A at the Ala Moana Center. And me and my girlfriend at the time, we waited in line and I got my Chick-fil-A and I took a couple bites and it wasn't all it's cracked up to be. And that's because I built it up so much in my head. So that's actually acceptancy variation theory. And yeah, I wanted to share that with you. Everybody have a great day. The Mr. G podcast is available. Most definitely, the best place is Apple Podcasts, but you can also listen on Amazon Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts. And if you're listening today and not watching the podcast, then it's important that you know that I am not wearing a shirt today. So that's important context. Everybody have a great week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Aloha.